Hi, everyone. Grab a snack and settle in as we hear three incredible stories starting in the Pacific Northwest. And next, we head over to the Great Lakes region and finally end with a story from a police officer in New Jersey and what he is shocked to witness. These stories are sure to pique your senses and keep you looking over your shoulder. But first, if you're enjoying being a part of this, please subscribe and turn on all notifications. Great. Now let's get into the stories. Hi, Lilith. I hope you get to read this on your show, because otherwise I'm at a bit of a loss right now for what to do with this information. I've thought about going to the authorities with what we saw out there in the woods, but I think they might just think we're insane or making a joke. There's no question about it, this is potentially dangerous. There's a creature out in the woods that endangered my friends and almost killed me. Something has to be done. I'm a logger living in Northwest Oregon. I've lived up here my entire life. These woods are my home. My father and my grandfather were loggers with the same company. I remember watching them cut down trees. Rather than go to ball games or do Boy Scouts, I sat in the passenger seat of 18-wheelers lugging logs across the state. When the time came to take over the business from my dad, it was one of the happiest days of my life. My friends celebrated with me, and I even got to hire a few of them. We began to turn a decent profit, and we became known in the area for being the best logging company in the Pacific Northwest. It was the 4th of July, and all of my guys were off and celebrating. I was planning on meeting them when we heard from a private landowner. He was the wealthy type, and the kind that liked things done on his timetable. We didn't usually give these guys the time of day, but whenever I did a job for them, he paid double the price, and sometimes extra. His wife made us lobster rolls too, and he had an extra Range Rover that he didn't want anymore. Yeah, imagine that. It was free to me for doing some light arborist work. All this to say that when he calls, we answer. It looks like all he wanted was a few of us to act as fallers. He had some old trees that he wanted us to take down. An easy job, super straightforward, just a bit tedious. So my buddy Todd and I set to work and ended up cutting well into the night. He was getting a little pissed off, but I reminded him of the payday. So we decided to just make camp for the night and pick up first thing in the morning. That way it would be out of our hair and we could just keep it moving. I pitched a tent for us while Todd made the fire. And even though we missed the festivities of the day, we had a few beers around the fire and grilled hot dogs. Now, I've known Todd since we were kids, and he always knew how to make a bummer situation a little bit more palatable. We spent a few hours telling jokes and drinking until we decided to get some shut-eye. The tent ended up being a bit warm, so I decided to sleep out under the stars. It was a beautiful summer night, and the stars were always more visible out here in the woods than in my backyard. So eventually, the sound of the wind and the swaying of the trees sent me to sleep. I woke up a few hours later, though, in the pitch dark. The stars weren't out anymore, and the wind was no longer blowing in the trees. Everything was very still. It felt like it happened in an instant, like I blinked, and this stillness set in all at once. In the distance, I listened, and I could hear a roar, a loud, blood-curdling roar echoing through the forest. All my hair stood up on end as I reached for my flashlight, and when I clicked it on, it was super bright. It beamed directly into the deep woods, and the roar happened again. And that's when the breeze came back. I crab-walked over to the tent to kick it so Todd would wake up. Slowly, he unzipped the tent, and he's white as a sheet. I know just from his face that he has also heard the roar. We know what bears sound like, and we know how to handle them. Todd actually liked to call them giant raccoons, but this sound was different. In hindsight, we were scared, but also curious. Only a very large creature could make a noise like this, bigger than a bear. In the next moment, a tree fell about 100 yards from camp, and it was a big, old tree. Probably something we would have cut the next morning. It slammed into another tree, and it fell that one too. Todd looked me dead in the eyes. Slowly he raised his flashlight in the direction of the fallen tree, and he turned it on. We were right. The creature was huge, much bigger than a bear. It was on all fours like a bear, and it had that similar giant head of a bear. But this creature had no fur, just bare skin. I could see its muscles shifting under its tough skin, and whatever it was, it felled 2 trees like they were nothing. The creature roared once again and turned in our direction. It stared into the glare of our flashlight, and in our shock, it came at us at a run. We looked at each other, and we both knew. We both did the only thing that our instinct knew how to get us away. We climbed a tree. Luckily, we got up there before the creature noticed where we went. Neither of us slept that night. It seemed like an age passed before the sun came up. We were up high in that tree, high enough that it must have lost our smell. But when we looked down, our tent and our camp was torn to shreds. That explained the noises we had heard that night, all night long. It looked like the whole pack of bears descended on it rather than just one large one. In the morning, we got down the tree and we got whatever of our stuff we could salvage. And then moving quickly, as quietly as we could, we jumped into our truck and booked it back to my place. I don't know what it was, but it could have killed us. Anyone who lives in our neck of the woods, you must be careful out there. No camping. Not until we know more about what's going on. Please, please be safe. I was a city worker in a tourist town on one of the Great Lakes. I'm not sure if I feel comfortable saying which one on here. I've never told this story to anyone before today, and I don't want anyone I know to think I'm crazy. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters or the supernatural, but I don't have any other explanation for what I saw. I was working on an old historic lighthouse. The city wanted to refurbish it and potentially open it to the public for tours, but it needed some electrical work done first, so they hired yours truly. Now, if you've ever done any work in old buildings, they can be a bit of a challenge. There's always something that goes wrong in one way or another, and I was having one of those days. I had a pretty busy week scheduled, so I wanted to get this lighthouse done by the end of the day, at whatever cost, and that meant staying late, well after dark. I never once had a strange feeling about the lighthouse or the surrounding area. People always talk about how they knew something was wrong before it happened, but I never got that feeling. I won't say it wasn't a little creepy to be working alone in this lighthouse once the sun went down, but I never felt anything bad. I should probably say a little bit about the lake I was overlooking. Without giving away the exact location, this particular lake is known for its bad storms and shipwrecks. Storms that seem to come out of nowhere. It can be calm here one minute and white caps the next. I was intent on my work, trying to get this thing done as quickly as possible, when I heard the sound of a ship's horn. This isn't a functioning lighthouse, and large ships don't typically come this way anymore. I looked out the window and I didn't see any lights out there on the water, but the sound of the horn was deafening. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I stared out the window for a moment. I know it was only a few seconds, but it felt longer. I was entranced. Suddenly, a thick fog began to roll in from the lake, and it crept across the rocks and all the way to the base of the lighthouse. It was insane how quickly it appeared, but this lake is known for changing weather. And then I heard the horn again. It was undoubtedly the horn of a ship, but as I said before, there were no ships on this part of the lake. I went back to my work. I was so close to getting this thing up and running, and I really wanted to be done with the project. And then I was interrupted again, but this time by a light shining through the window. It was blinding, and I couldn't see where it was coming from. For a moment, I was terrified it was a ship about to crash into the rocks, because the only thing in that direction was the water. The whole thing was a little weird, too. The unexplainable ship's horn and the sudden blinding light. I decided to head down the stairs and investigate what on earth was going on outside. The lighthouse only had the one window facing the lake, so I couldn't see anything facing land. When I got outside, the fog was so thick that I could barely see my hands in front of me. I heard the ship's horn once again, and this time I could pinpoint the sound coming from towards the water. I swore I heard a woman crying, but I wasn't exactly sure. It was like the fog had muffled the sound. I walked further towards the water, and I reached the rocks, and I made sure to step carefully so I didn't misjudge where I was standing and fall in. The sound of the woman crying grew stronger, and as I got closer, it sounded less like crying, and now it sounded more like singing. I followed the voice. I don't know why. Looking back, it was a terrible idea, but that never crossed my mind at the time. I know I said before that people usually instinctively know when there's something wrong. I never felt any of that. The fog was so thick that I didn't see the creature until I almost stepped on it. It stopped singing when I reached it, and it had this human voice, but it was definitely not human. It was a little bald thing with pale skin and big silver eyes. I had never seen eyes like that before. It smelled of fish, and it had teeth that I can only describe as similar to a cat's. I pulled out my utility knife as soon as I saw its teeth. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't want it to come near me. I don't know if it was fear or anger in those big silver eyes, but it took one look at me, and it leapt into the water. I don't know how else to describe it. It had legs and arms like a person, but it definitely was not a person. I never told anybody what I saw. Not ever. I mean, how can you explain that to people? I'm convinced it tried to lure me out there with the sound of the ship and the light and the singing. I don't know what its end goal was, and I'm not sure that I really want to know. I locked the lighthouse up for the night, and I decided to finish the next day. I didn't run into anything strange out there in the daylight, and I did walk down to that spot again where I saw the creature. And this time, there were no signs of it. Hey Lilith, I wasn't a believer, not for a long time. I'm an officer with the New Jersey State Park Police, and I cover the Wharton State Forest. I grew up around the Pine Barrens, and everyone knows about the Jersey Devil. I heard all the stories, but to me, that's just an urban legend. The Pine Barrens is considered one of the most haunted areas in the country. It's rich with history and folklore, and littered with abandoned ghost towns, the remnants of once bustling iron, paper, and terracotta industries. While the Jersey Devil may be the most infamous resident, he's hardly alone. This brings in a lot of self-proclaimed ghost hunters. On one afternoon, I responded to a call about a car accident near one of the abandoned towns. A car had driven off the embankment and crashed into a tree. It was a group of teens, and thankfully nobody was hurt, but they were absolutely terrified. Apparently they were snooping around the ruins looking for a ghostly woman who reportedly haunted the area. Instead, they saw something even more shocking, and they were convinced it was the Jersey Devil. They showed me some blurry pictures, several of a shadowy figure deep in the woods. It could have been a hiker for all I knew, although it appeared to be somewhat misshapen. They had a few more pictures of something flying in the sky that looked suspiciously like a big vulture. It was clear they believed it, but it's not the first time I've seen this kind of photographic evidence, and as usual, it was hardly convincing. Nonetheless, I listened as we waited for a tow truck. They could tell I wasn't buying it, and as they left, one of them challenged me to go check it out for myself, while the others warned me to stay away. It was getting late, but the ghost town was pretty close, and I decided to go have a look. Not for ghosts or the Jersey Devil, but to make sure the kids didn't damage anything. It's not uncommon to find graffiti and trash left at these places. The ghost town was a short hike off of an old dirt road. I hadn't visited this particular place before, and I have to admit, it was pretty creepy, especially in the waning sunlight. There was no town left, so to speak, just mounds of dirt and the scattered remnants of old brick mills and stone foundations overrun by foliage and trees. Everything looked okay, and as I was about to leave, I was assaulted by the smell of sulfur. And that's when I noticed the quiet that came over me. It was as if the chirping birds and the buzzing insects just disappeared. It was unnerving, to say the least. I looked around and something caught my eye. About 25 yards away, lurking in the forest at the edge of the ruins, was this shadowy silhouette. It was hard to get a clear look through the trees, but it did kind of resemble the figure in those pictures that the kids took. It looked like it was wearing a trench coat, or maybe a cape, and there was something strange about the shape of its head, like it was wearing a mask or a hat. I called out to whoever it was, and I started to make my way back to the ruins. The figure didn't do anything. It just stood perfectly still, not making a noise. I couldn't make out any face, but I could feel like something was looking at me. And then what happened next was the most bizarre and terrifying thing that I have ever witnessed. I called out to the figure again, and as I got closer, I quickly learned that it wasn't a trench coat. They were wings, enrobed around the figure, and they suddenly unfurled into a span of maybe 20 feet. For a brief second, I caught a glimpse of the creature. It had a skeletal head of a goat with horns, and its body was scaled like a lizard. And then it made the most inhuman, ungodly shriek before shooting up and disappearing up over the treetops. I stood there, frozen. Did I just see the Jersey Devil? I got out of there fast and I didn't look back. I jumped into my car and I sat there for a minute with my adrenaline racing. And now I knew why those kids were so scared. I got my head together and I started the drive into town. It was twilight at that point and I was on a dark, lonely stretch of road. I kept replaying the events in my mind, going back and forth between, was that or wasn't that what I think it was? And then an unearthly shriek pierced the air and snapped me out of my reverie. The same shriek that thing made before taking flight. And then something heavy landed on the roof with a loud thump, causing me to swerve. I panicked, thinking the Jersey Devil had come back to finish me off. And then I heard the sound of scratching metal as something was ripped from the roof. I glanced in the rearview mirror and I saw the emergency light bar clattering across the road in pieces behind me. The car shook as something again banged on the roof. I couldn't see what it was, and there was no way I was going to stick my head out the window. I don't know how long I drove like that, but it felt like forever. I heard that shriek again, and the car rattled as the creature took off. I could literally feel the weight lifting as I was able to gain better control of the steering wheel. I watched as the tips of the creature's wings passed briefly in front of my headlights, and then it was gone. I floored it back to the station, and when I got there, I noticed I was gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. Another officer came out and gasped, pointing at my car. I then got out and looked at the roof, which was shredded, and the light bar mounts were twisted and torn apart. The officer asked me what happened, and when I said it was the Jersey Devil, he laughed. I almost visited those kids to corroborate our experiences, but I thought it was best to just leave well enough alone. Even in my report, I stated that I had carelessly skimmed a low-hanging branch. The department wasn't happy, but I was too ashamed to tell them the truth, or at least what I thought was the truth. A few weeks later, another officer came up to me in private and said that he, too, had had an experience with the Jersey Devil. He never said anything about it because he was afraid of being ridiculed. That gave me a sense of relief, even validation. At least now, I know that I'm not the only one who has seen it.